Hi friends and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, hello. My name's George Agenbar and I'm a UK music producer. Today's video is all about sibilance, and that's that harsh s sounds that we can get in our mixes and our vocals. So make sure you stay tuned to find out how we can fix these, and hit that subscribe button and notification bell for new videos every Wednesday.
And things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
So what is sibilance? Sibilants are consonant sounds that we create by causing turbulent airflow through two narrow passages. We do this by directing air with our tongue through our front two teeth. Examples of these are sip, ship, zip, and genre. The whole field of phonetics and how sounds have their own characteristics is fascinating, but beyond the scope of this video. So for today, the take-home point is that sibilants are high-pitched and loud, and this allows us to isolate and treat them. We don't want the sibilants in our mix because they are harsh and can get tiring to listen to. There are things we can do in the recording stage to reduce sibilants. Number one is our mic position. Close miking with condenser mics emphasise sibilants and plosives. If we stand further away from the microphone, we get less sibilants in our mix, and this is because these highly energetic, high-frequency sounds can't travel as far. We ideally want to be 8 inches or approximately 2/5 away from our microphone when we're singing to avoid these sibilant and plosive sounds. So I'm going to sing really close to the microphone to see how these sibilants and plosives are emphasised, and then I'll sing at the ideal distance. So let's give it a go.
Slow down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up. Slow down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
Number two is our axis position. Generally, an off-axis mic position will help reduce sibilants. By this, we mean that the diaphragm of the microphone is at an angle other than 90 degrees to the horizontal plane. This will change the tone of your track though, so could take some experimentation to get right. Okay, so now I'm going to sing with my microphone on axis, 90 degrees to the horizontal plane.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
So now quickly I'm just going to twist the microphone so that I'm singing off axis. And let's see how that changes the sound.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
Number three is our mic choice. Large diaphragm condensers are often favoured for recording vocals, but these diaphragms can often sound harsh due to high frequency responses and resonances. And this is compounded by the fact that manufacturers profile the sound of the diaphragm with a high frequency boost to improve the mic's airy sound. And budget microphones tend to be more of a problem in this regard. So in summary, stand back, stand slightly off axis, and use an expensive microphone. But in the real world, if we stand back, room resonance and noises can become an issue, and not all of us can justify a U87 just yet. There is actually another technique I learnt during a lecture with Adrian Shortman, or other people may know him as Professor Stretch, that reduces sibilants, and all it involves is having an elastic band or a hair tie, a pencil, and your microphone. So I'm going to quickly show you that now. Okay, so here I've got my pencil and my hair tie, and you just want to attach it to your microphone facing directly down the middle of the microphone's diaphragm, like so. And this presumably works by dispersing the highly directional sibilant waves, but it can lead to overall dull vocals, so you want to experiment with it. We're going to use the clip from earlier that I sang on axis with my microphone and then compare it to this pencil trick.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up. Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
The reality is that for most of us, we're going to have to do some de-essing and sort out some sibilants in the mix. There are two main ways we can do this. There's an automatic way, the kind of set and forget methods, and these use plugins like de-essers or noise gates or compressors, and there's a manual way. There are advantages and disadvantages to each, and sometimes we need to use more than one method. It's also useful to understand how to work each of these methods, because sometimes your favourite technique may just not be doing the job. Logic Pro X has a plugin called De-Esser 2. It's a frequency-specific dynamic compressor. It has extremely fast attack and release times to capture the shortest transients and retain a natural sound. It's a really great plugin. Let's have a look at it. If we look at the De-Esser in Logic, we can see that there are quite a few controls. Firstly, the threshold dial sets the level at which the De-Esser kicks in, much like the threshold on a compressor. The max reduction controls the amount of gain reduction applied. The frequency sets the centre frequency of the detection filter. We can change the width of this detection filter using the range buttons. Split is narrower than wide. We can also solo the frequency range being de-essed using the filter solo button. This is really handy when we're setting the threshold and frequency dials. At the bottom is the filter buttons, and this changes the type of cut the de-esser makes, either a peak or shelf. There's then a choice of modes. Absolute mode is more typical of a de-esser. It means that the threshold level remains constant, so has to be at a low level to reduce sibilance in the quieter part of the track. Relative is more sympathetic and will adjust the threshold relative to the input signal level. So I'm going to put a de-esser on this vocal track. I'm going to start by turning on the filter solo button and adjust the frequency dial to find the range where the sibilance is most present.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop maybe. It's best to give it up. Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up.
I'm going to turn up the threshold slightly because it's taking out too much at the moment, which could make it sound as if I have a lisp, which I don't want.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop maybe. It's best to give it up.
I'm also going to turn up the max reduction slightly so the sibilance isn't ducked out as much.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop maybe. It's best to give it up.
Okay, so this is the track without the de-esser.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop maybe. It's best to give it up.
And this is with.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop maybe. It's best to give it up.
As you can see, it's fairly quick and easy to operate and does a pretty good job at getting rid of sibilance, so is quite a good technique to use. We can also use a dynamic EQ to sort out sibilance, and this is very similar to the workings of a de-esser. It reduces the gain of a frequency range that we've chosen. Logic Pro X unfortunately doesn't have a stock plugin of this, but I did have a look and here's a plugin that I found the other day that's completely free. A dynamic EQ is essentially a combination of an EQ and compressor. It's a bit like a generalised de-esser, which means that we can use it to sort out sibilance, which we're going to do for the purposes of this video. This is a great free dynamic EQ plugin. It's called the TDR Nova and is made by Tokyo Dawn Records. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can get this plugin. We can use this EQ in a variety of ways, which is what makes this plugin really great. We're going to look at it briefly today, but I'll leave a link to its manual in the description as well. Okay, so we have 4 bands. We select one band we want to use and go to select the filter shape we want. In this case, I want to use a peak shape to make my cutting of sibilance more accurate. We can then choose the frequency we want the centre of the filter to be by dragging the blue dot or using the frequency dial. And the Q, or the width of the filter, is adjusted by using the dial next to it. We can solo this frequency range we've chosen using the band solo button, which is really useful. So, from using the de-esser, I know the majority of my sibilance in this track is between 11 and 12 kHz, but I'm just going to check that I've put the filter in the right place using the band solo button.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop maybe. It's best to give it up.
Okay, so that sounds about right. To activate the compression of the frequency band we've set, or to start reducing it, we press the threshold button. Now we just set all the compression parameters we would, as if we were using a normal compressor, And I did make a video all about compression last week if you're unsure about what these parameters do or how to set them, so I'll leave a link to that in the description. So here's the track without dynamic EQ.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
And here it is with dynamic EQ.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
It does a good job, just like the De-Esser really. There is a lot more that this plugin can do, as I've said. We just scraped the surface really, but I would really recommend it, and I've been loving using it on my mixes. It makes such a difference. So that's the TDR Nova. Now the ethos of this channel is trying to use the minimum non-stock plugins. There is a workaround in Logic to solve this lack of dynamic EQ plugin, but if I'm completely honest with you, it's far from ideal. But I am going to show you, so here it goes. The workaround is using a ducker, which we find in the Noise Gate plugin. Firstly, you want to turn on the high and low cutoffs to set the frequency range that is going to be cut. So again, I'm going to set the low cutoff to as close to 11 kHz as I can. But it only goes up to 10 kHz, which isn't ideal, but will be okay. And the high cutoff to around 12 kHz. Again, like the De-Esser and dynamic EQ, we can solo the frequency range being cut using the monitor on-off button. It's then about setting the threshold and ducking level correctly, which can be difficult to get right. It's a very fine balance, so I would really recommend spending some time on these settings. Then the attack, hold and release times. Using this plugin, I go for a slightly longer hold and release time than I do with a compressor, to try and make the effects of the plugin sound smoother and more natural. I also use a very long look ahead time for smoothness too, but you do have to be careful of latency when you do this. So here's the track without the ducker.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
And here it is with.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
As I said, it's not an ideal solution. It can sound clunky, but it can work if we spend a lot of time getting the parameters set correctly and can be a technique that we use. So in summary, dynamic EQs work well. Their disadvantage, much like De-Essers, is that the same algorithm is applied across the whole track. And in most cases, this isn't a problem. But sometimes we need to do more. This can be when we have a really difficult vocal, or we have multiple vocal tracks sung by different people. So we're going to have a look at other methods we can use in more detail now. We can use simple compression. At the beginning of this video, I said that sibilants tend to be loud. We can use a simple compressor to catch these transients and reduce their volume before we do any other processing. Okay, so I'm setting a fast compressor, and this time I've chosen the vintage FET model, and that's because it's known to be excellent at taming vocals and drums because of how fast its attack and release times are. So as you can see, I have set an incredibly fast attack time and still a fast release time, although it's slightly slower than the attack time. I've chosen a threshold of -21 decibels and a ratio of 2.9 to 1. So here's the track without compression.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
And here it is with compression.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
As you can hear, this has certainly tamed some of the sibilants. The reason this isn't my preferred method is because you can also hear that it's compressed the rest of the track and affected the sound of it. And so I would use this technique if I had to, but it's not my go-to. We would do this at the beginning of our chain, but you want to be careful because there can be other peaks in your track that will also get compressed. We can also use the gate method. This method relies on the phase cancellation of sibilants. If we send the sibilants to a track, reverse the polarity of that track, and then mix it back with the original signal, the peaks of the sibilant should be cancelled out and reduced. It may be easier to show you this. So for this method, we want to first make a copy of our vocal on a separate track, which we'll call the gate track. On this new vocal, we put a noise gate and we're going to isolate the sibilants. We're able to do this because, as I mentioned, sibilants is loud. So I'm going to change the parameters of the plugin and check that I've got mainly sibilants coming through here. And we can go through how to use a noise gate in another video, and I'll leave a link to what all the parameters do in the description. So let's have a listen to this track.
Slow it down, stop,
Yep, that sounds good to me. The next thing to do is use a gain plugin to phase invert the track. This means that when we mix this gate track back with our main vocal, the loud sibilant sounds we isolate will cancel each other out. So I'm slowly going to mix the two tracks together until I hear a reduction in the sibilants.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
Here's the main vocal by itself.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
And here are the two tracks together.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
Admittedly, this is quite an odd way to remove sibilants, but actually I don't think that it's too bad. I think it's a decent technique that's worth considering. So those were the main automatic settings. Now let's have a look at the manual ways. We can, of course, go through our track word by word and treat each instance of sibilants individually. This is very labour intensive and takes a very long time, but has the advantage of possibly being the most flexible and accurate way of controlling sibilants. It's really not for the faint-hearted, but I do firmly believe that we should all know how to do this. So let's have a look. Okay, so this technique is actually fairly straightforward. You want to zoom quite far into your track so you can see the waveforms very clearly, and here you should be able to identify the sibilant waveforms. They're normally quite spiky and quite big. If you can't see them obviously, then all you need to do is listen through to your track and stop as soon as you hear a sibilant sound, and you know that waveform is the sibilant one. So we go through selecting these waveforms and cutting them out. And then you simply select each cutout bit and turn the gain down. You can add fades in between cuts just to make it sound a bit more natural and a bit more smooth if you want to. So here's the track without the sibilants turned down.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
And here it is with the sibilants turned down.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
So that certainly works, but we can make it easier. Okay, so this is actually relatively straightforward. It follows on from the last method of having isolated the sibilants. You simply create a new track that's completely empty, and then move all the sibilants that you've chopped down onto the new track. This is a lot easier because it means that you can process all the sibilants at once if you want. You can turn them all down by the same amount, but you also have the option of editing each one individually still. There is an advantage to that last method I've just shown. Having a sibilants only track can mean that we EQ and process the sibilants differently to the rest of the main vocal, and this can improve our final mix.
Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up. Slow it down, you better slow it down for you mess up and make it all stop. Maybe it's best to give it up.
We can also apply compression to our sibilants only track to have further control of the dynamics. Another advantage of having a sibilants only track is that we can use exciters and reverbs and other effects on the main vocal without having to worry about making sibilants worse. Although sometimes F sounds and T sounds can be a problem, so we need to look out for those. There is a lot of debate about where to put your de-esser in a chain. Some engineers like to put it at the beginning, some like to put it at the end, and some like to do both. It's really a matter of trial and error. You may want to de-ess first, apply your EQ and processing, and then if there's still a bit of harshness, de-ess again. At the end of the day, it's about doing what's best for your mix. You should be aware that sometimes high frequencies in other instruments can be superimposed on the vocals and magnify the sibilants. Usually, equalisation on these higher frequencies is enough to tame this sibilance. And also backing vocals may need aggressively de-essing to avoid compounding any sibilants on the main vocal. So that's de-essing and how we deal with sibilants. I hope you found this video helpful and useful, and please let me know what you thought in the comments and if there are any other videos you'd like to see. Make sure you've hit that subscribe button and notification bells for new videos every Wednesday, and I will see you again soon.